Alrighty, so we are starting a new chapter. We've studied for the past couple of months. We've studied chapter 80, which has over 90 laws about variety of different halachas of keeping Shabbos. And now we're moving on to a more complex issue, which is chapter 81, that deals with the public and private domains and moving things from a public and private domain. So the first chapter is going to be chapter 81. And in chapter 81, it deals with primarily how do we define these different domains. Shabbos. We know that there's four domains in Shabbos. So chapter 81 defines those four domains, and then we're going to learn about the laws in 82 and further about carrying and all the laws of Shabbos when it comes with regard to these things. And a lot of them it may seem a little bit like a Torah class or a Hasidic class to start off with. But this chapter is a very Aaron, is a very foundation chapter to understand the halachic definition of the domains, so we can understand the laws that come in question. And some of them we will bring up in our discussions. So let's start. Arba Rishuyis l'Shabbos. There's four domains that make up of so to say of a person's interactions of space that make up the laws of Shabbos. We have the Rishus Yachid, the private domain, private property. Rishus Rabim, a public domain. So there's the two extremes. We have a Carmelis. We'll learn what a Carmelis is, and a Makom Patur, and a place that's the actual He translates in English Makom Patur in Makom Patur because it's hard to really translate it, but it's a place of permissible, and we'll understand what that means soon. We will explain because this is Kitzur, right? There's a lot of Talmudic discussion and halachic discussion about these four rishuyos, but he's going to put it into a small chapter 82, and then we should be able to bring the laws in to understanding of how this applies to how we're supposed to keep Shabbos, because it's very important to know also what's rabbinic and what's biblical, etc. Ezer Rishus Yachid. How do you define a private domain? So he says, this is what the Torah says. It's based on the halacha says makim shulachol hapachas arba tvachim al arba tvachim. It has to be at least a square, 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim again, which would be 4 fistfuls. So it's about a little over 12 inches, square 12 inches. Shizo makim chashiv shrei l'shtamish boy. Why? What's the reason that the space has to be these 4 tvachim and 4 tvachim? Is because it has to be a place that you could do something in there. It has to have space. It has to be a domain that could be, but you could, in that space, you could use it for something. And so one condition is that the actual opening has to be a space of 4 tvachim and 4 tvachim. We'll see in a second if the walls are counted or not. Umukiv mechitzas. It has to be covered by mechitzas, which are walls or surrounded by mechitza, means separations. And how tall do these separations have to be? They have to be as high as 10 tvachim. So they're 10 tvachim, 10 fistfuls. Okay, let's just let's just assume a tefach is about 3 inches. So it has to be 12 on 12 inches in space, with walls or separations at least 10 tvachim high, which would be 30 inches high, which is unusual a space in Torah. 10 tvachim is like l'matmi asar tvachim. When you talk about like space within this world, it has to be within 10 tvachim. So the idea is that you're blocking up the space of this world, so to say, and that's to make it private. Above that is already anyways not a problem. So it has to be at least 10 tvachim high. Afilu einin shleimus legabru. See in a second, even if they're not complete walls. Vechoritz. So that's number one. Well, number one of a public domain is 4 by 4 with walls surrounded by walls or separations of 10 tvachim of let's say 30 inches. A trench. Choritz is a trench. a trench which is deep 10 tefachim, so it goes out of the space instead of up, down. V'rochav arba tefachim, and inside the trench is again 4 inches by 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. I'd say it's about 12 inches of usable space in the trench. If it's just a tiny trench with no space, so it's again not considered a space. Gamkein dinik mechitza, so that itself is also like a separated, means it's separated from a public domain. So it means even if you would have a trench of 4 tefachim space, in deep 10 tefachim, it's no longer part of the public domain. It's a private domain. Look in the Chacham Tzvi, which was a great Talmudic halachic scholar, lived in Amsterdam in about the year 15 something like that. Hold on, Aaron. V'chein bar, also a pit. Now, it's not exactly sure why he separates a pit from a trench, but because trench and pit seemingly are the same thing, but bar is kind of its own space. Shehu v'chein bar shehu oimuk asara, it has to be deep 10 also. V'rochav arba also has to be wide 4 tvachim. V'chein tel. Now he says the opposite on the side. So we have a trench, a bar, and we have a tel. A tel will be a mound that's up out of the public domain. Shu goiva asara, if it's as high as 10 tvachim out of the space. V'rochav arba, and it itself is also a mound that is 4 by 4. Avafilu kli, doesn't even have to be a mound of earth, but even if you had a barrel that has 4 by 4 and is high 10 tefachim, so that barrel itself, that kli on top of that kli would be a private domain. Kumain teva, like a box or a what do they call them? Let's say a box. In Goiva Asar, if it's as long as it's high 10 tvachim, oy chavis or barrel shiagula, which is round, v'eshvi lerabeya arbal abad, it has within the circular, right? So there's always in halacha we always wonder the outside of the circle, is it part of the 4 tvachim or in the 4 tvachim? We have these questions, but it has to be outside. So if you have the circular outside of the 4 tvachim, and in that circular there's 4 tvachim, so and it's a barrel and it's high 10 tvachim, then it's a private domain. Even if this barrel is in a public domain, or this trench, or this pit, or this chest, box is in a public domain, or in a carmelis. The carmelis will learn what it is, but it's kind of the neighbor of a public domain. It's a smaller public domain. It's not public, doesn't have the numbers to be public, but it's pretty much anything that we know as what we would call the outside is a carmelis. There's very few halachic reshus harabim public domain that exist. Very few. Maybe the questions of highways usually is because it's cut off. But maybe a street like in New York, like Ocean Parkway or Eastern Parkway, I highly doubt there's any street. Maybe again, there's a question of the I-5 of the highway we could be considered public domain. But if you take out the main highways in Seattle, there's no street in Seattle that I know of that would be the definition of a public domain. But again, in like places like New York, Chicago, or maybe California. So now these trenches, pits, mounds, whatever, that's 10 tvachim high, 4 tvachim in usable space, it separates itself from within the public domain and becomes a private domain. Which means to say that if you're going to try to, if you're in a public domain, you pick up something and you put it down right next to you, it's within your 4 tvachim, you haven't moved it. But if you're gonna stand right next to a mound and pick up and hold something in a public domain and put it onto that mound, then you're transferring an article from Aaron. I know you want to ask a question. When I'm ready to ask questions, I'll call on. So when there's a to move something from a public domain to a private domain, if you're going to place it on the barrel, so you're going to be taking it out of the reshus harabim, out of the public domain or the carmelis, and putting it into the public domain. Now, this is another rule. In this chapter, we're just giving ourselves the rules of what are the domains of Shabbos, so we can understand how to keep the Shabbos when it comes to moving things in and around the space in Shabbos. There is no such thing that once you have reshus yachid, let's say you have, let's just call it classic reshus yachid, your house or your backyard, right? Your backyard is covered by a fence, and that's your private domain. So that's obviously a Rishus Yachid. That's not like a Chiddush. So it goes, that Rishus Yachid goes all the way to heaven. I mean, it doesn't have a cutoff space going up. It says that's just V'gam Rishus Yachid. The average Rishus Yachid, the ear of the Rishus Yachid, Rishus Yachid ad Rakia till the heaven. V'machitzas atzmam. What now? The question is, what about the walls that surround, that enclose the private domain to make it a private domain? Shehem akifis Rishus Yachid al gabeim, on top of them. Let's say you have a fence that surrounds your backyard, and it's not a thin fence; it's a thick fence. You could place something on the fence, on top of the fence. So he says, "V'machitzas atzmam shehem akifis Rishus Yachid al gabeim gam kin din Rishus Yachid lehem." They also are Rishus Yachid. Meaning to say, even if the fence doesn't have the four tefachim, because it's definitely 10 tefachim high, so that's what makes it a fence. But it may not have 4 tefachim. So I'm not sure what the chiddush is really. But the idea is, the idea would be, what's the question? The question wouldn't be if you're permissible to put something from your backyard and just put it on top of the fence, because that's part of the private domain. The question would be if you're standing on the public domain, and you take something and you put it on top of the fence of a private domain, then you're transferring. It's prohibited. Where in the case, if it was a makim patur, if it was a permissible space, you wouldn't be transferring it to a prohibited from one space to the next. Okay? So we have a few issues here. The main issue is the transfer of things from public to private, but you also have the question of carrying anything in the public domain. Public domain has its own laws. Okay, now he says, what about if you have a wall and you have holes in the wall? So, that the ones that are facing the Rishus Yachid, the private domain, so they're an extension of the private domain. Even if they were to go through and through the wall. So if you have, let's say, a window, kind of a window space within the wall, a person could put things down. It's not top of the wall, but it's within the wall, and it could be even lower than 10 tefachim, right? So that's also considered a private domain, because someone could use them in the private domain, and it's your wall. So again, what is the significance of mentioning this? If I was standing in the public domain and putting something into one of those holes, I'm transferring something from a public domain to private domain. That's something therefore they consider Rishus Yachid. What happens if you only have kind of something in a space in the wall that doesn't go into the private domain, it only is opening from the public domain? We will discuss that at a later point. And we'll discuss it in the next chapter, in the next law. Yes, Aaron.
Okay.
Thank you for being patient.
Yeah, no problem. So just 3 questions, 3 different areas. Number 1, my hallway, which goes outside to the trash, in my building on my floor. Second, the pool, which has all the walls all the way down to the pool. I'm not talking about swimming, so just knock that out. But it's a pool area. You could just sit there and read if you wanted. So it has fences, and my parents have an outdoor backyard. The front yard has no fences. The backyard has trees, and the only fence is from the neighbor. It's not my parents, but they have trees marking out their area because they don't want to see their backyard neighbors. Okay, those are
okay. Thank you for the questions. Let's try to keep the questions on the actual topic that we're learning as we learn them, instead of just finding questions about.
That's what I'm asking.
But I'll answer you. Okay, the question of your hall goes into another question, which is the question of erev chatzeres. When you have a lot of public, we have the law is, and we're going to get to that, is that when you have a group of people that live in a building or in a yard space called a chatzer or a mavoi, so it's all a private domain. It's not public space. Your hall is not public space. It's not even a carmelist. You have to be a member of the building or permission from someone in the building to be there. If a person just hanging out decides to go into your hall and lie down and take a nap, and he or she has no connection to people in the building, even if they did, you'd be asked to leave. So it's a private domain. But that goes into the question of carrying things in a joint private space, and that's why we have what's called the erev chatzeres. One has to make the erev that unites all the tenants of the building to be able to carry things. Hold on, but we'll get to that when we get to those laws of Eruv. That's the laws of Eruvin. So that if you're, as far as the public-private domain goes, so your hall is a private domain. But the question only is, it's a private domain that belongs to everyone, and therefore we have to find out how and when we make an Erev Chatzeris, especially if there's Gentiles and Jews together in the building, etc. There's laws. If there's no Jews in your building, it's you're the only Jew, it's different than if you had a few Jews, like I'm sure you have in your building. You had a few Jews in the building and a few Gentiles in the building. So I'm sure there's someone in your building that has created an Erev Chatzeris, who made to be able to make it a joint carried space. Okay, that's number one. And usually the rabbis take care of that. Number two is your question about the pool spaces. Again, it comes under the same question. Your pool space, as long as it's an enclosed space in the building, it's part of and it has the walls to close it off from the outside space. So it has the laws of a private domain. Okay, even if you have a private domain, but if it doesn't have the walls, like we said, so that doesn't, it needs the enclosures to make it permissible to carry it in there. Again, we have the same question of carrying in a joint private space, which is the pool space is a joint private space. Any tenant in the building has permission to carry there. That's number two. Again, we're going to get to those questions about Erev Chatzeris when we learn those of how do we go about, because for instance, I live in a building and there's an Erev Chatzeris, and how does it work if there's an Erev in the city, etc. Now, your third question I think you asked was about your parents' space. So then that also is you have to understand something. If your parents' house is surrounded by three fences or four fences, let's say the house, there's a cutoff, it's cut off halachically because of your parents' neighbors' fences, although your parents don't have a right to use the fence, but it still doesn't stop it from closing off the space.
It's only on one side, and the rest is surrounded by trees, because trees count as a fence.
We'll learn about that, but there's not it's not so simple that it does. It's probably in most cases it's not. It's depending on the kind of leaves and how they drope down, but in most cases not. I'm not sure if you're talking about if your parents' house is just backyard is just totally open and only one side, or if there's some sort of fence at some point.
No, basically it's open. You can see all your neighbors. Some people put up fences. What my parents did is put up trees.
Okay, and is it in like in a general enclosed area? The whole neighborhood enclosed?
It's
Like,
like a subdivision, like in Long Island, or like a subdivision.
is it
Like in Seattle.
is it like a country club? No.
No, it's like one house, maybe, and
Okay,
then you can
so
walk to the
yeah,
next house, but you see everyone.
yeah, okay, so then you would have to put an Erev but you would have to put an Erev in the backyard to make it permissible to carry.
So
And as
trees
far
don't count as a fence.
no, not in this case, no.
Okay.
Rebecca, sorry, Barbara first. Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, so maybe I live in an area where I don't have a private backyard. I share like a kind of a courtyard with the other houses around me. And it's blocked off. I mean, the public can't go walking through there. I mean,
Why? In what way? How is it blocked off?
there's no sidewalks leading to it. You have to go out of the back of your house to access this.
What is enclosing? What is enclosing it? All the houses?
Just all the houses, yeah.
Okay, so you'd have to ask Rabbi Goldschmidt to come down there and check if in between the houses is enough of enclosures to consider like as if it's locking up that space. If there's big gaps of opening, a gap opening would be about 20 feet, 10 tefachim, but also it depends because you don't really have a Tzuras Pesach, you don't really have walls, you just have the kind of the buildings, but it could very well be that the position of the houses are in such a way that create the mechitzos, the separations.
Okay.
But if not, then Rabbi Goldschmidt should be able to figure out a way. You could put up little. It's not you don't need actually fences because we have if you have like in an Arab, you could put up those little 1 by 1 wood poles that are as high as your waist or so, and you just and put a nail on top and string it around your space. So that would lock in your domain to make it you can walk outside in the summer and take a book, etc.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure, Rebecca.
If you already answered this, I think I missed it, but how come in Flatbush I see people with like like an Eruv or like a rope or something like in their backyard. It's their private property, the same way the house is their property. Why do they need an Eruv in their backyard?
It's not enough to have a private property. If you don't have the fencing, we just learned. That's why this chapter is very important. This chapter is an information chapter. We have chapters that deal with specific laws. This is a background chapter to give us a definition of what are the domains of Shabbos. And the domains of Shabbos, he says, has two conditions for a private domain. Number one, it doesn't mean that you have a paper that says it's a private domain. That's my property. The definition of a private domain is that it has at least 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim in space, and it has mechitzos that surround it to lock it off. Those of 10 tvachim high. That defines a private domain. Now those mechitzos could be because it's lifted up 10 tvachim or down 10 tvachim or pit or a trench. All that's details. But the idea is it has to have the 10 tvachim that's separated, and it has to have the 4 tvachim of space. If you have a backyard in Flatbush, what have you, and there's no fence or nothing that surrounds it, so it's still not a place that you could carry. A place that's according to Shabbos, according to Torah, has to be surrounded by mechitzas.
So by putting up a string, they're like building an Eruv, and then it's enclosed.
So like I told Barbara, if she would put around in her space, in her property line in the backyard, you have these, they have them these wood beams that are not beams. That's not the right word. That's too big. It's called wood panels that are that people use for gardening, small literally they're an inch by an inch, and you just stick them in the ground. They have usually like a sharp end. You just could stick it into the ground. So as long as you have that, there's 10 tefachim. There's no more than 10 amas in between them, like an erev, and you have a string that's attached on top. So you could. That creates the mechitza. How the Torah defines the mechitza for Shabbos. It's not necessarily how we define the mechitza for sukkah. For instance, that in a sukkah that wouldn't be kosher because you have to have also that it stands up in a ruch mitzuya. It has to be a house, not just here. But we're talking about you're marking off a space as opposed to creating a dwelling. So when it comes to sukkahs, we're trying to create a dwelling. So therefore, what defines as a sukkah, you couldn't just use those beams and a string to make a sukkah. You would have to have either the material or lavud or other things. When it comes to Shabbos, so to cut off the space and to privatize a space is enough to have these poles, so to say, with strings like an erev in the backyard.
But they only have one string going in one direction. That's enough?
I'll tell you why. Probably the other directions are covered in other ways.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a breach. That's the breach that they're concerned with.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's do the footnotes over here. Footnote number 1. Okay, most of the footnotes over here are just going to be references. So he says over here, it has to have partitions. The thickness of the walls is not included. So the thickness of the wall is not included to make the 4 tvachim. So if you have very thick walls, like we learned last week about the chimney, right, that gets blocked up in gurasim mechitzas. So if you have very thick walls, and the outside of the walls is 4 tvachim, and the inside of the walls is not used, so doesn't count because you don't have usable 4 tvachim. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. I'm assuming because he should really put that in the 4 tvachim. Yeah, okay. I'm assuming that's what it means. Okay, number 3 is a reference. There's 4. We have 3, and then we have 4 right here, similarly to the same as a bore. The difference between a bore and a trench. So a bore he calls a hole. The walls of a private domain have to be visible. If a hole is filled with water, okay, this is Allah. What if you have a pit? This is why he mentions a bore versus a trench. Trench is not a receptacle, so to say, to fill up. Mainly, it's a trench. But a pit, you can make a pit that's a hole, and you could fill it up. So he goes, that's not going to help. You need to see the walls. So here the walls of a private domain have to be visible. Meaning, if a wall is filled with water, it's a private domain. Let's say you have a pit and you fill the pit with water, so you can see the walls if it's clear water, right? That's fine. But if it's filled with fruit, you fill the whole pit with fruit, so you can't see anything. It is not. Even if you intend to remove the fruit, it's not going to be there permanently. So you're not blocking up permanently the hole, but again, it's not a question of if you like a carry in there because it's full of fruit. The question is if you're to throw something or put something in there from a public domain, it's going to become you're transferring something from public to private. It is not even if you intend to remove the fruit. Magen Avram, see Mishnah Brura. Okay, if the water freezes, okay, what happens if the water freezes? It's ice. So now your entire pit is full of ice. See Magen Avram and the Chai Adam regarding that. Okay, because ice, the question would be, of course, that ice is not a liquid, but at the same time, it's also not. You could see it has more vision than say fruit. Okay, number 5. Footnotes. Hey Danny, hey Z. Number 6 is all references of locations. Number 7 is that they're talking about if there's holes in the walls on the side facing the private domain, even if they run through the side to the public domain, I think he says, it's still permissible to use it because it belongs to the private domain. Okay, so that defines. So far we said in law number 1, there's 4 reshus, the 4 domains of Shabbos. Again, a public domain, private domain. A Carmelist will learn what that is, and a Makom Pator will learn what that is. And we've defined the definition of a private domain is a space of 4 tvachim with 10 tvachim of wall space that surrounds it to block it off, whether it is actually walls around your private domain, or a pit that's deep 4, or a trench, or a mound that's up 4, or even a barrel that's upside down, that it's kind of its own, it has 10 tefachim of walls going down. Okay. What is a public domain? And this is where things are very complicated, because there are very few public domains today in the world, not just in the world. Again, the public domain is everything is based on the Jewish people's experience in the desert. So it says like this, it's streets and markets, shvakim markets, that it has to have sheishes amma al sheishes amma. It has to be at least 16 by 16 square amos. Again, amma is about 18 inches. Again, how do we know that it has to be 16 amas? Because that was the space of, so to say, the roads within the camps of the Levites in the desert, where people were going in and out into the tabernacle. It's not just roads and markets in the city, but even roads and markets that go from city to city, they have to be 16, 18 amas wide. That makes it a Rishus Rabbim. And whatever is in a Rishus Rabbim, let's say a little box or something. If it's not about 9 inches lifted off the ground, it is bottle, it's nullified to the Rishus Rabbim. You can't have like a little speed bump and say, oh, it's a speed bump, it's a little elevation. That's elevation is part of the public domain. Even if this little, so to say, this thing is branches, meaning to say, you wouldn't walk over there because no one wants to walk through kaitzim. If it's thorns, if you had thorns in the Rishus Rabbim that's under 3 tfachim, under 9 inches, you can say, well, most people wouldn't walk in it, so it kind of cuts off from the public. No, that's nullified to the public domain. Let's say you have a big piece of dung, right, from an elephant in your public domain. You're in India, so you'd say, well, no one could step on that because that's dung. So you say, no, but if it's not at least 3 tefachim lifted off the ground, so it's nullified to the public domain. Shein Rabin Darishim Leim. The point is that the public don't step on these things. Mikol Makim Batul Gabi Karka, it's nullified to the earth of the public domain and part of the public domain. Arhu Rishus Rabbim, and therefore it has a lachik of Rishus Rabbim. V'chein Guma Rishus Rabbim. Let's say you have a little bit of a ditch in the public domain. Im Eina Mukar Shleishet Tvachim. If that ditch, what do they call them? A pothole is not 3 tvachim. It's not 9 inches deep. That's pretty deep for a pothole. Harihu Rishus Rabbim is nullified to the public domain. What about holes in the wall? Which we spoke about in the end of last law. If you have holes in a wall that's part of a public domain, that surrounds a private domain, but the holes in the wall don't go all the way into the private domain, because if it would go into the private domain, then the entire whole, so to say, would be property of the private person to use. But because that person can't use it in their private domain because he or she doesn't have an opening, it only goes into the public. It's only open from the public side. If that hole is in the wall below 3 tvachim, it's also part of the public domain. These are all part of the public domain. Again, we're defining these spaces to know about all the laws of Shabbos of moving from domains or within domains. What defines these domains? What about if they are holes in the wall that are above 9 inches, 3 tvachim? Then we have to examine all their measurements. If they have 4 by 4 inches, 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, like a shelf in the wall, and they're under 10 tvachim, and they're in the public domain, and they have no access to the private domain, so now they're a karmelis, which we're going to learn what a karmelis is, which means it's not a rishus harabim. It's not a public domain, but it's like a minor public domain. If it's the ma'al misar tvachim, and if it's above 10 tvachim, so you have 4 by 4 above 10 tvachim. What did we say before? Anything that's above, even in a public domain, that's above 10 tvachim. There is no rishus harabim above 10 tvachim. You have to remember something. We said at the end of law, I think 2, in the middle of law 2, that a private domain goes to the sky. A public domain does not. Anything above 10 tvachim in a public domain is no longer public. What we consider to be grounded is within 10 tvachim. There's a concept in halacha, in chassidus, in Kabbalah, lamata misar tvachim. The Rebbe would always say, we want a blessing, we want Mashiach, lamata misar tvachim. That's the space. Anything above 10 tvachim is no longer public. It's not possible. So what if it's in the wall? There's a shelf that is above 10 tvachim, and it has arba tvachim, it has 4 tvachim, and it's a rishus yachid. It says, what happens if it doesn't have 4 by 4? Then anyways, it's a makom p'tur. We'll learn what a makom p'tur is. Makom p'tur is too small of a space, so it's putter. It means it doesn't have a space to it, so it kind of nullifies itself to wherever it is. If it's in the public domain, it's kind of it's. For instance, if you can, the question would be, if let's say you're standing in a public domain and you're holding something, you pick something up in the public domain. If you put it in something that's above 10 tvachim, above 10, let's say again 30 inches, and it has a shelf wide and deep 4 tvachim, which would be, let's say it's about a foot wide, and you pick something up off the ground and put it into that space, you transfer it from one domain you transgress Shabbos. You took something from a public domain and put it in a private domain. And even a karmelis, you're not allowed. But if it has less than 4 tvachim, so it's called a makom p'tur. So you haven't really moved it out of any domain. It's an extension of wherever the domain is. Okay. Then it doesn't make a difference if they're above or below 10 tvachim, because it doesn't have the 4, so it doesn't make up a usable space, so it can't be a private domain, so therefore you have not transferred from a public domain or a karmelis into a private domain. The problem says sometimes and says hamavois. Mavoi is what does he translate? The mavoi is the alleys. So we're going to learn like this. We have in general in Torah, really in the law is so much of when it comes to chatzeris, but it goes into Shabbos as well. The alleys let's say in other times, still today maybe, they had either people's private houses, and then they would have like groups of homes that had a private domain, like Aaron talks about his hall space, but they had also groups of homes that made up of, you have till today country clubs. That's groups of homes. It's a chotzer. So you have a chotzer, and it has a few homes that belong to that chotzer. That's a much more private space. Then you have alleys. The alleys have more access. And usually you'll have different chatzeris that go to the alleys, different groups of homes that go to the alleys, and the alleys lead to the public domain. It's kind of an avenue to the public domain. So what are the laws of these alleys? The questions are if there are alleys that are open from two sides, like a street that opens and closes, or if it's a cul-de-sac, it closes up. that they go into the public domain. So we'll learn sometimes they are themselves a public domain, sometimes they're not large enough to be a public domain, and there are karmelis which are minor public domains. There are ways to lock up a mavoi. There's ways to lock it up and to privatize it, privatize an alley. And there's many laws about all the definitions of public domains at karmelis. Yesh oimrim, and there's another opinion. Just like the Jews in the desert had 600,000 Jews, men, so too that defines a public domain because everything's based on the desert. So if you have a public space that doesn't have 600,000 people going through that public space on a daily basis, it will never be a public domain. It's only a karmelis, which means very few places today. And there's a lot of questions. Does a car count as people going through, or is each car its own individual space? There's a lot of halachas and Rav Moshe Feinstein. Again, there are very few public domains according to halacha. First of all, 16 inches wide, 16 amos wide, which is, let's say, close to 25 feet wide. For a road is very wide. There's very few that make up that space, and there's very few that make up the 600,000. So public domains are much more hard to find. And he finishes off. There's very few. He says there is no Rishus Ram. That was the days of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Again, there are people that believe that there are spaces today that do make a Rishus Ram. Like I said, Ocean Parkway and Flatbush Avenue and Eastern Parkway in New York. But he says in his times there is no Rishus Ram because there is no 600,000 people passing through space. But a person should still be careful because you have to be careful because it could be that doesn't define the space, and therefore you're transgressing the laws according to the biblical laws of Torah. Okay, we're gonna go through the footnotes here. I think after that we're gonna stop because I'm gonna ask questions and I do have to end a bit early today. Footnote number 8. Okay, what is an amma? Okay. In the temporary of a Shea Amos. Oh wow, that's a mistake. Okay. 9. Mesechus Shabbos, he quotes, okay, these are sources. 10. What's another source? Where's 11? Another source. Okay, what is this? He says, but if it's lower than 10 tefachim and it doesn't have, if it's lower than 10 tefachim or above 3 tefachim, and it's a hole in the wall, it's a karmelis. He says, karmelis, okay, he explains over here what a karmelis is. I'm not sure why he says it here and not before. Karmelis is defined as an area which cannot be classified either as private or as public domain. See paragraph 4. See paragraph 4 again. No, I guess it means law 4, which is the next law that we're going to learn. Okay, and that's 11, 12. We just did 13. Makim Pitor as an exempted area. Okay, it's exempted. That's how he defines it. 14 is 15. There's some authorities say that any place that doesn't have 600,000 says look in the Shulchan Aruch and the Bahag and Rashi, etc. Okay, what's 16,000? He says 600,000. Some say that applies only to a city. But the major intercity highways are considered a public domain even when there are not 600,000 passers-by, even according to Rashi. Again, so the big intersections, interstates are considered public domain even if they don't have 600,000 people traveling through a day. 600,000 people is a lot of people. 17, including non-Jews. Okay, so you don't have to have only Jews, but even non-Jews will make up the 600,000. Of course, it's about making it public. During the 40 years of the wandering through the desert, that was how many Jews there were. 19, 20, almost none in the city, excluding large cities, which are numerous nowadays. Okay, so nowadays, again, he says that there are spaces that have the definition of the 16 amos and the 600,000. Again, Brooklyn, and that's why it's not so simple that there's an Eruv in Brooklyn, because you can't make an Eruv in a public domain. And according to Moshe Feinstein, I'm not sure. Again, we'll get to the laws of Eruv when we get there, and obviously there are Eruvs in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a big question because of its amount of people, etc. Manhattan is a little more complicated; it's an island. Yes, Rebecca. We don't hear you.
Is this
Go ahead.
better?
Yeah, now we hear you. Go
Okay.
ahead.
If there's a playground that's surrounded by a fence on all sides, a
Mhm.
metal fence, can you carry within the playground?
You can, but again, we spoke about the playgrounds, the parks, and that break up kind of the private domain. But if the park is enclosed, and like you have that very much, it's very common in Europe, where the playgrounds are enclosed and it has a fence around it, then yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron,
Just to help her out with her question, my rabbi said, "Is I don't recommend you walking to the beach, not because, um, it's the whole thing is that eventually the Aruch, even going to some far away parks, the Aruch ends, and then, even if you could carry in the park, how are you getting stuff to the park?
tell you what?
It's that even if you go to a park, because we have lots of local parks that are nice for like the kids, so some have different degrees of stuff, and they're like in the summer I don't recommend going to those parks during Shabbos because eventually their roof ends at some point, and even if you could carry inside the park itself, how are you getting stuff to the park?
Yeah. How are you getting stuff to the park if there's no Eruv to the park?
No, because at some point the air roof in Brooklyn, if you follow it, in my neighborhood ends, and there's many things right beyond it, and so the rabbi just says, if you can curb yourself and not take anything, be my guest. But in the hot summer, you need water, so you got to carry it. Be mindful.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so next week we're gonna go through the chart I created with the help of ChatGPT. I just want to show a little bit of a picture. It showed the four, whatever, they didn't get the writing right, but this is the four domains. So he has over here again, the pit is here, not here. This would be the pit, this would be the mound. I'm not sure he made a house a mound, but this is the idea of a private domain is enclosed, public
That's
domain is
amazing, ChatGPT.
yeah, so this is like the street. Makom Pator would be like a stone that's above 3. At the same time, it's not 4 inches, as 4 tfachim. And then you have a Carmelis, which is kind of the definition of a Carmelis is that it's not 10 tfachim deep. It's more than 10 tfachim. It's 10 tfachim. It's not 10 tfachim deep, and it's more than 10 tfachim wide. So it's not private or public. And coming back at the end, we're going to read basically Carmelis is what we deal with mostly today, because like we said, there's very few public domains.
Look,
But of course, you're not allowed to move something
ChatGPT
from
made this.
private to public domain. Barbara, you wanted to say something, ask something?
Yeah, I was just wondering, can you send that chart? I would like a copy of that.
Yeah, I'll post. Let me put it in actually the whole chart. We have all the laws and all the definitions. Again, it's with my help of Rabbi ChatGPT. So there's some things that it's not always accurate. But helps us with the definition. I'll put it into a PDF and post it on the group.
Thank you. But just
Thank you.
this, I
Go
like the
ahead.
way you speak like me. I say Rabbi Google and
Today we have help. You have to be very careful with ChatGPT because it's not always accurate, but nevertheless. Yes, Danny, you're on mute.
Rabbi, can I get the information for the group? Because I'm not able to access these charts because I'm not in the group.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure how do we get you into our, I don't want to say this publicly, but you could, I'm trying to figure out a way that you could get me your number. I'll add you if you're on
you go to
WhatsApp.
you go to WhatsApp. You go to the part where they say names. Then it says see more, and then you click on your name, and it'll get a private conversation with you over chat.
No. Danny's not in the group. She's trying to join the group.
So you got to put her number.
Yeah, but I don't want to take it now on.
No, don't take it now.
Yeah.
No. But like she can send it to you privately, right? Just you guys can exchange numbers privately in the chat.
Yeah. So let me just turn off the YouTube and the recording, and then Danny, you could just I'll leave on the Zoom. You could just put your number in the chat, and I'll add you to the group.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Since I remember that
No,
I
let me just,
invited, Donnie initially immediately, but then I didn't get the
yeah, so let me just turn off the recording.